Welcome, seekers of the truth, to the Magical Services channel. So this is going to be a most supreme love horoscope for the general collective for the weekend that is between June 12th through June 14th of this year of 2026. With that said, collective, let's get into your horoscope. So between June 12th through June 14th, 2026, the relational field compresses into a transition cycle defined by emotional depletion, recalibration of attachment expectations, and a narrowing toward decisive emotional resets. The dominant signature is a waning lunar phase moving toward a new cycle threshold, which functionally behaves like an effective audit of recent relational exchanges. What has been sustained, what has been overextended, and what no longer produces reciprocity at a stable energetic cost. In relational terms, this is not a period of expansion or initiation. It is a filtration process. Emotional investment becomes increasingly selective, and the tolerance for ambiguous connection structures decreases. This is especially pronounced because the emotional atmosphere is not neutral. It is internally weighted toward closure dynamics rather than continuation dynamics. Bonds that lack clear mutual responsiveness begin to feel structurally inefficient, and this perception intensifies over the 3-day window. The first major driver in this cycle is the stabilizing yet materially demanding influence of sustained attachment desire within a nurturing but saturation prone emotional field. There is a strong pull toward familiarity, comfort, and emotionally safe connection patterns. However, the same configuration amplifies a counter effect, emotional saturation. When emotional input exceeds the capacity for clear relational feedback, attraction does not deepen. It becomes noisy, repetitive, and eventually self correcting through withdrawal or detachment. This is a critical distinction. Desire remains present, but it becomes less forgiving of inconsistency. By June 12th, relational awareness is already proceeding, subtle, is already processing rather. By June 12th, Friday that is, relational awareness is already processing subtle imbalanced signals. Attraction patterns lean toward people or dynamics that feel emotionally receptive, but the threshold for satisfaction is paradoxically higher. Simple engagement is no longer sufficient. Responsiveness must be coherent, timely, and emotionally legible. Where this is absent, interest decays quickly, not through conflict, but through internal reprioritization. At the same time, there is a parallel undercurrent of emotional grounding in sensory and embodied attraction. This produces a tension between wanting depth and seeking simplicity. In practice, this manifests as alternating impulses, one moment pulling toward emotional intensity and meaning, the next requiring quiet, space, and reduction of relational noise. This oscillation can produce misinterpretation of feelings if read too quickly. The correct interpretation is not instability, but recalibration under diminishing lunar emotional illumination. As the cycle progresses toward June 13th, Saturday, that is, relational tone becomes more decisive. Emotional ambiguity is no longer tolerated as easily. Interactions either begin to resolve into clarity or they start to dissolve naturally. There is an increased there's an increased likelihood of noticing where emotional reciprocity is asymmetric. Importantly, this is not dramatic rupture in energy. It is a structural disengagement. Interest does not collapse explosively. It evaporates where feedback loops are weak. At this stage, attraction becomes more mentally processed than emotionally immersive. There is a stronger role for assessment, whether a connection is aligned with long term emotional coherence or whether it is maintained out of habit, memory, or convenience. This is where relational truth becomes harder to avoid. Emotional rationalization weakens under sustained internal comparison between what is received and what is invested. By June 13th, a distinct shift occurs. Relational attention becomes more externally oriented and less emotionally entangled. This creates a psychological distance effect within ongoing interactions. People or connections that were previously felt as central begin to feel observational rather than immersive. This is a sign of transition toward reset conditions rather than continuation conditions. Simultaneously, relational desire does not disappear, it refines. Attraction becomes more selective, oriented toward clarity of intent and consistency of behavior. Mixed signals become increasingly intolerable. This is where relational pruning occurs naturally, not by confrontation, but by reduced emotional reinforcement. Approaching June 14th, Sunday that is, the system enters near reset conditions. Emotional bandwidth is at its lowest functional threshold, which paradoxically produces clarity. In this state, attachment is no longer sustained by emotional amplification, but by essential compatibility. If something does not meet this minimal clarity threshold, it simply does not persist in attention. This is the most important relational inflection point in the sequence of this weekend. The final phase is not about building something new yet. It is about clearing residual emotional noise so that new relational structures can form without interference. In practical relational terms, this is where outdated expectations, unbalanced emotional roles, and one sided investment patterns become difficult to maintain, even internally. A notable feature of this cycle is the increasing emphasis um, on identity consistent attraction. So let me repeat that. A notable feature of this cycle is the increasing emphasis on identity consistent attraction, meaning emotional connection is no longer enough on its own. There must be there must also be coherence between how someone behaves and the kind of relational future that that behavior implies. This is where illusions, especially those sustained by intermittent reinforcement, begin to fail. If consistency is absent, the attraction does not stabilize. It collapses into indifference. Across the entire window, the relational field is also influenced by a deeper restructuring impulse affecting how boundaries are felt and enforced. Boundaries are not asserted aggressively, they become self evident. What does not align simply does not receive emotional continuation. This is a quiet but decisive mechanism of emotional economy. There is also a subtle but important emergence of relational self referencing. The attention increasingly turns inward to evaluate what kinds of emotional patterns are actually sustainable for future attachment cycles. This produces a reduction in tolerance for emotionally expansive dynamics, situations that require excessive interpretation, emotional labor, or compensatory understanding without reciprocal grounding. By the end of June 14th, relational energy is in a preparatory state for renewal rather than active engagement. Emotional receptivity remains present, but it is filtered through stricter internal criteria. The system is no longer absorbing indiscriminately. It is selecting with precision based on coherence, stability, and mutual responsiveness. The outcome of this cycle is not immediate relational expansion, but clarity of relational architecture. What remains after this period is what is structurally viable. Everything else becomes background noise that no longer influences emotional direction. In practical terms, this window tends to produce one of three outcomes in relational dynamics: consolidation of a stable connection that already demonstrates consistency, quiet detachment from misaligned or uneven bonds, or a redefinition of expectations that prevents repetition of prior emotional inefficiencies. The most important conclusion is simple and strict. Emotional attachment is being reconditioned away from intensity-based bonding toward clarity-based bonding. What survives this cycle is not what feels strongest in the moment, but what remains coherent when emotional amplification is reduced to near zero. So that's what I had for you today, collective. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video or comment this video or share this video or hype this video or subscribe to our channel. All those actions would be greatly appreciated. Also, make sure to check out the offer in the description box. It is awesome. And I thank you for being here and for supporting our channel. Until the next time, blessings.